Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Monday, January 5th, and is Venezuela the 51st state now? What's going on?
Yeah, who knows? I don't think they know. You know, that's the thing is, I doubt that they really have worked out any sort of thorough plan for how to run Venezuela. That may seem like an extraordinary statement, but first of all, this is Trump. This is a guy who's very weak on the details and very impulsive. And yeah, he wants to get Maduro. He got Maduro. Yeah, but what next? Now I think they're trying to figure it out. It's not too unlike what happened, of course, in Iraq. It turned out they really didn't have a plan. You know, after they overthrew the government, they didn't have a plan as to what to do with the country. And we saw the mess that followed. Now, in this case, they haven't overthrown the government, right? They've got Maduro, but the government is still there. The military, you know, the vice president, who's of course a member of his party and part of this Bolivarian movement, is now the interim president, has taken over until Maduro returns, which I'm afraid probably will never happen, or until there are elections. So, yeah, but it's clear the administration has been very clear, I should say, that they intend to run this country. I know Trump used that term, I'm going to run the country, 3 times during that 20-minute speech he gave. So it wasn't, sometimes Trump speaks inexactly or whatever, he throws out sentences, but he's said it again and again, and that's been not just in that speech, but then in further statements, and we're hearing the same thing from Marco Rubio and others. They're intending to run the country. How they're going to do this is not clear. Again, this is a country that's ideologically hostile to them, and to do it, you can carry out a decapitation strike or an abduction, as they did. But to actually occupy the country, to run it, to really run it, requires, I guess you can say, one of two things. Either that we have to militarily occupy it and force our will on that government in that way, or we have to get cooperation from them. And it's the latter that is being suggested. But I don't know how possible that is. This again. Go ahead.
Right. Well, it seems like they want to use Delcy Rodriguez, and Trump has basically threatened her, said, if they don't do what we say, then something worse than what happened to Maduro may happen to her.
Right.
So it just really depends on whether, Delcy Rodriguez is how much of a backbone she has here, or, is there even a possibility, which clearly many people were compromised. Do you think someone like Delcy Rodriguez could have been compromised as well?
Well, it is possible. In fact, there was a report in the Miami Herald that claimed that she had conducted secret negotiations through Qatar, of all places, with the United States government. And that,
why Qatar?
I don't know. Qatar always...
There's something weird going on here, I feel, with... Okay, I'm going to go down this conspiratorial route just off the bat now. Maybe it's my algorithm and I need to fix that, but I feel like there is this relationship, between Israel and Venezuela, and we hear them tying, Iran to Venezuela, and I'm going to just show you a couple video clips that have been popping up on my feed, and I want you to tell me if there's any connection here. Okay, so I'll start with, there's 2, they're not very long. I'll start with Netanyahu.
Venezuela. They're in cahoots with the Maduro regime. They're exporting terrorism to America, to the American hemisphere, and then they want these Hezbollah and Hamas to get their guys into the United States. So Hamas and Iran's and its proxies are a threat not only to us, but to Israel, all America's allies in the Middle East, and to America itself.
Okay, and let me just jump right into one more real quick.
Okay.
Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
I promise we one day will have a close relationship between Venezuela and Israel.
I myself look forward to visit the State of Israel As soon as we conquer freedom, we will prevail.
And I can announce this, that our government will move our Israeli embassy to Jerusalem.
Okay, so I know I'm taking a few clips, and I know there's a lot,
Right.
but also we have that Netanyahu who shows up at the White House right around the new year. Trump walks out and says, uh-oh, Iran's in trouble now. We need to, they can't have any conventional missiles. If they go try to restart their civilian nuclear program, we're going to bomb them again. And then a couple days later, protests start breaking out in Iran. And it's clear that Mossad was part of these protests. Mike Pompeo even tweeted out, Happy New Year to every Iranian on the streets, also to every Mossad agent walking beside them. That's what Mike Pompeo tweeted. So it's clear. And then a couple days after that, then we have all of a sudden Venezuela successful regime change. And it just seems like, okay, now the next regime change will be Iran. Is there some connection here?
I don't think so. It's, first of all, going back to your clips, neither of those clips surprised me. It's what you would expect. Netanyahu always wants to, put Hezbollah everywhere. That's part of his and let's say his government's ongoing project, never-ending project, is constantly to smear Hezbollah and the various enemies of the state of Israel, the axis of resistance. So they see something that's angering the American administration or the American people. They'll immediately say Hezbollah is part of this. I think that's just that's the playbook that they operate by. So there's just nothing surprising there. And then everybody understands the importance of Israel to the U.S., and certainly to this administration. So anybody who wants something from the U.S. is always going to try to, they're always going to try to paint themselves as ardent Zionists. This helps their cause. It doesn't mean that this is really what's motivating for anything, but this is something that they do they to get their foot in the door, or to again boost whatever cause the particular leader is trying to advocate. So I don't think that it proves that there's a really deep connection. It's just the typical connection. I mean, it's just that because Israel is so important to the U.S. and the U.S. is so important to Israel, they're always trying to play up these things, on both sides. Right.
I guess whether or not Israel encouraged the U.S. to take this action, it doesn't really matter.
I think possibly he did. Again, Maduro was very anti-Zionist. Is one of a few Latin American governments that was, consistently anti-Zionist. And the Israelis are on a push, they call them the Isaac Accords, to establish friendly relationships with Latin American countries. And, clearly they have some, like in Argentina, the Malay government, and now there's some, other governments have kind of fallen into their camp. So yeah, sure, they would like that. But I think on the list of things that are important to Israel, that's way, way down the list. Of course this is good, but they're much more concerned about Iran and other things, obviously in their neighborhood.
I think that maybe the success of this operation, that the U.S. was able to capture Maduro, kidnap Maduro without losing a single American life, from my understanding. And you have to admit that is impressive. It's evil. But it's right. Very impressive that we carried it off without a hitch. Just think about what if a helicopter went down? The reception could be completely different, if American soldiers died. So I think it was incredibly lucky that nothing happened, or it just shows the extent of the CIA involvement in Venezuela and how many people they were able to buy off. But yeah, I think the problem is that maybe this will start to get a little bit of megalomania bubbling up inside of Trump. You're like, okay, this was successful. And so this is a great opportunity for Israel, regardless whether or not it's like, look, you had a successful regime change here. We did one in Syria. We can do Iran again. It helps lead that impetus. Or another one is just go ahead. Trump might just say, let's go ahead and take Greenland, because what he's effectively done now is saying that the rules-based international order is dead. Now it's might makes right. And with his new Monroe Doctrine, we can just take Roe Doctrine, he's calling it. We'll just take Greenland. It doesn't matter. What is Denmark going to do? They can't do anything.
Yeah.
So the world's just in a completely different place now after this.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think first of all, is the megalomania is probably a problem. That was something that came across very strongly during that speech he gave, following the abduction. It's always there, but it just seems like it's rising to new levels. He has a sense of invincibility. He pulled off. This was like the most amazing large scale operation of its kind since World War II. And it follows on the heels of the incredible Soleimani assassination. He brought that up. And of course, in the, what was it, Operation Rising Thunder or whatever, the one that took out the nuclear facilities in Iran. And so he's the Zeus, you're right.
Oh, sorry, Midnight Hammer.
Midnight Hammer. You're right. Midnight Hammer. Yeah, thank you very much. Anyway, he's like Zeus on Mount Olympus hurling his thunderbolts. This is the sense that he gets. And I think he really imagines himself that way. Is a kind of a god emperor. And so, he's pointing to these other places, Greenland, Colombia, Cuba, maybe even Mexico. When the first time he mentioned Greenland, that was even before he took office, I thought it was a joke, but it's not a joke. It's clear he's really got that on his mind, and he might do it. It would be easy for him to do, militarily, easier than what he just pulled off in Venezuela.
Right.
Yeah. I think there's reasons to be real concerned. And, one thing that really struck me while I was watching this is just saying, I am sure there are some people in the U.S. government that are thinking this guy is a danger. He is really a danger to the U.S. and he is doing such damage to the system that we've set up and to our reputation that we need to take him out in some way. I'm sure there are people who are starting to think that. I don't know that they're actually doing anything. But if he goes on and takes Greenland, then I think we're in danger of a military coup. I'm serious. I really think so. We've entered some, really some very uncertain territory now,
I'm a bit disappointed that there aren't more people within his administration that are speaking out, because they have to realize that you are going down with this ship. Your legacy will be tainted too. Anybody associated with this administration, unless you're one of the few people but there aren't any that had the courage to speak up and say that this is wrong. Right. People like Tulsi Gabbard, where are you? JD Vance, whatever. They're just. You guys are done, if you don't speak out against this. But it's a cult. It's a cult of personality, and it doesn't matter. Trump is emperor, he's dictator. Everybody has to, kiss his boot, and that's what it feels like,
Yeah. No, I'm very disappointed with Tulsi Gabbard. Because she had been very explicit about Venezuela in particular, and I think like maybe it was 2019 that she made a very, very strong statement about, intervention in Venezuela and the need to respect Venezuela's sovereignty. So I think she is morally obligated. Maybe I've been trying to, rationalize her failure to speak out and resign. But I don't think I can do it anymore. I think she just has to, otherwise she's complicit.
Yeah. It's how they get them is they just tell you, like, just stay, whoever is behind all this stuff is just saying, Tulsi, just toe the line, and then, maybe you'll be VP with JD, and then, and then she
right.
That's the lie they keep on telling themselves, but then you become the evil you're trying to, when you do that, though. So.
Right. You kind of sell little bits of your soul on the way. You keep on making compromise until you're just, that former principled self is gone.
Yeah. I'm going to harp on one more conspiratorial thing that I just saw. I probably should change my X-feed algorithm a bit, but there was this, it was talking about the Rothschild's bank. And it was saying in 2000, there were 9 countries that did not have Rothschild bank. I didn't write them all down, but it was like Iraq, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, Cuba, Syria, I think, Libya, so basically all the countries, and we've overthrown more than half of them since 2000. Yeah. Is there something behind that there is just that
I think this is a case of correlation and not causation, meaning that they're not in those countries because these are geopolitical adversaries of the U.S. That's why they're not there, because they're careful to toe the line and stay on the right side of Western hegemony. It's not that the absence of the bank, led to the attack on these countries. It's because these were already had targets on them, so Rothschilds stayed out. That would be my guess. Correlation, not causation.
Okay. All right. Well, one of the things that has been most disappointing for me since seeing this capture is just the response from the American people. I thought this was textbook criminality, right? You went in and kidnapped a sovereign country's president and his wife. You just kidnapped them.
Right.
It's insane. And then the response from the United States, I think this has to do with the fact that the operation was executed so successfully without a helicopter going down and American personnel being killed, that Trump is able to tout this off as a huge win, and they're parading Maduro around New York City. It's just a circus, and everybody in the United States, not everybody, but a big majority seem to be eating it up. They're just like, yeah, America's back, baby. And maybe I'm getting the wrong vibe, and there's so much information going out there just how everybody in Venezuela is celebrating and that this was a great thing, and it just shows that American power is real.
Yeah, I've heard there aren't the celebrations, and that's fake news, is my understanding. And there have been protests, of course, in Venezuela, but above all, shock. That is what the atmosphere is described as, a state of shock in Venezuela. People are staying at home, or they go out. Just they're. You
froze on me, Dad. You still there?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Anyway, people are staying at home, or if they go out, it's just to panic buy at the local store because they're worried about the future. They don't know they've heard these threats of a second wave, and they don't know what's going to happen. Who knows? It's just it's not going to end well. It may not immediately unravel and come apart, but in the end, it's not going to end well. This is not going to work.
Yeah, but aren't you a little disappointed in the response from the people within our country? I just feel like, surely can people think about this just for 2 seconds and think about whether or not this was a good action and if we should be proud of it? But people like Elon Musk are celebrating it. Right. Elon Musk loves it. And people like Alex Jones or even Nick Fuentes, it's like,
oh, really?
These people that were supposed to be regime change. Like the whole point was America first. But I guess in their mind, it's easier to make that America First connection with them because they're like, well, it is America First to take this oil and control, these resources, and we can take advantage of it. And that's America First.
Right. That's one possible interpretation of America First. That's true, and I think that was always there. Well, I'm not surprised. Well, first of all, I've always said that it's his base. That is Trump's base, his supporters would be greatly pleased with an operation like this. This is the sort of thing that they like. They loved Operation Midnight Hammer. Okay, that time I got it right. They loved it. It was actually, in spite of all the criticisms that was coming from people like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and so forth, his base ate it up. It was over 90% approved of that operation. And I think, clearly his base clearly beyond his base, much of the country enjoys these kind of things. This is what makes them proud to be an American, unfortunately, these daring midnight raids. That's the kind of thing, it's Hollywood. It's the sort of America that they like to imagine. Remember, of course, the Iraq War was very, very popular at first, during the first, up to the toppling of Saddam Hussein's government. And then, the reality started to set in, and then it became a real disaster. So anyway, if Trump would just pull out right now and say mission accomplished, and then say, we're not going to run the country. Maduro is a problem. Yeah, we don't really like these other people so much, but, he can come up with some fake statistics. Drug exports are down by 90% from Venezuela. because they were never there. It's easy he was fabricating the statistics to begin with. He could declare victory, and people will like it. They'll just enjoy the Hollywood aspect of it. So I'm kind of surprised, actually. I thought like that was the one kind of thing that he really understood, is that you don't become involved afterwards. You go in and then you come right back out and it's over. You declare, victory, and that's it. And now, he's even talked about boots on the ground. That was asked him directly, and he said, yeah, we're not afraid of doing that. So I think it is, this is maybe the megalomania, that before he had a healthy sense of caution, he saw what a disaster Iraq was, and that's something that he did not want to do. But we could end up with that here. I mean, it's not clear where we're going to go, but there are all kinds of possibilities, and none of them, let's say possible futures at this point. And I don't think any of them are good for us. Some things are good. It could, like I said, unravel quickly, and we could be in a civil war and insurrection very quickly, or it could be something that develops long term. But one way or the other, it's going to be bad.
Yeah, I don't see him just turning around and claiming victory. I think he's made a lot of promises to his business friends and people that are involved. I mean, there's tons of money to be made here, and I think that's what they're excited about. And I think he is serious about the Monroe Doctrine 2.0, the Trump corollary, this Roe Doctrine. I think I think to some level he understands that the USD as a world reserve currency is in trouble. And that he needs to reassert this dominance, at least within this hemisphere. And we can't have, all China and Russia circumventing the sanctions, because, the economy in Venezuela has been suffering because of our sanctions for so long. Yeah. But the fact that China has now begun to invest heavily into Venezuelan infrastructure and develop their oil, they're able to escape those sanctions, or they were beginning to, like the process was starting to climb out. And I think that was a realization, because all of a sudden it worked, it succeeded. Then throughout South America, and said, you know what? I guess you don't have to go with just the American way. You can shop around. You can have Russia help develop. You can have China help develop. And hey, these guys are way easier to work with. They're not constantly pointing guns at you and saying that we'll take your resources forever. They give fairer contracts and deals. So, and I think that was the risk.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, again, there are different motivations that went into this, and part of it is personal, some, personal dislike of Maduro. There's even this a report that came out of the New York Times that what set Trump off was a video of Maduro dancing. Yeah,
that's what I heard.
And some people said, that just can't be it. But with Trump, you never know. It really could be, like he was, but to put it down just to that would be unfair. I think that, there is institutional support for this, and that institutional support, we're talking about the State Department and the Pentagon, is geopolitical in nature. And, you put your finger on it. I think China, above all. China was deeply involved and was receiving 75% of Venezuela's exports, and it helped them to they were beginning on rebuilding the oil infrastructure in the country, and had made real improvements, and export quantities were going up. So this was I think you're right, and this was a message to China and a defense of American domination. I won't say just influence; it's a lot more than a sphere of influence here. It was like, this is our neighborhood, and you just got to get out of here. That's
the big question, though. Will China and Russia, will they listen? I mean, basically, I think it depends on Delcy Rodriguez, right? If she says, we have this partnership with China with our oil, we will honor it and we will continue it. And then I think that will be the big sign, actually. If she breaks off the deal that they've have with China on developing their resources, and switches to the United States, then we know that, okay, she might have been in cahoots, or she was compromised. Although I was listening to Garland Nixon last night, and apparently Garland Nixon has actually spoken to Delcy Rodriguez before, and he said that Delcy Rodriguez's father was tortured and killed by the CIA, something like that.
Yeah, I think he was a communist revolutionary, and he was captured, tortured, and killed I don't know if it was the CIA. The CIA may very well have been involved with it. It was a U.S.-supported regime at the time in Venezuela. And so she grew up, I guess she was very, very little when it happened. So I don't know that she even has a memory of her father. But she basically grew up without a father, but she always knew, who her father was. So she's very much part of this revolutionary tradition within Venezuela. And I also heard from Max Blumenthal, who interviewed her back in 2021. She's a very smart woman. She's not any figurehead. And actually Maduro too, he's just sometimes he's been so demonized and he's described as like, he's just a bus driver or whatever. No, he is a very intelligent man. So yeah, she has those revolutionary credentials. She's quite intelligent. She's actually displayed some real competence too in like dealing with various problems in the country, including I think she was overseeing sort of the rebuilding of the oil infrastructure and which was really paying dividends. Exports were way down, and I think a big part of it is sanctions. The U.S. is saying, these guys are just total failures. They can't take care of their own country. Well, you're sanctioning them to same thing like with Iran, right? You impose these sanctions with the purpose of creating economic pain and chaos. And then when you see the economic pain and chaos, you say, oh, look at those incompetents. But there was, I think, also real mismanagement, so that the sanctions were, the effects of the sanctions were compounded by the mismanagement. Anyway, but I think she showed some real competence. This is what I've heard in helping to kind of rebuild it. So, she's a competent woman, comes out of this revolutionary tradition. She may not be the pushover that the Americans seem to think that she is. It's going to be interesting to see. Now, she's made some very strong statements, condemning the attack, the abduction. And she also even pointed to a Zionist, going to your rabbit hole here, a Zionist undertone. So, and it, so anyway, it just remains to be seen. She's in a very difficult position, right? How do you retain sovereignty? The U.S. is saying, okay, she's got it, or, Trump directly. She's basically got to do what's right, which means what we tell her to do. Or we don't lift the blockade and we don't stop blowing up the boats. So, the fleet's still out there. The blockade is still in effect. So what's going to happen? Who's going to get, one thing is there have been several reports that Maduro was willing to make a deal. He was negotiating with the U.S., right up until recently. And he negotiated even before this blockade began. He showed a willingness to be flexible about the oil industry. Maybe privatize part of it and allow American companies in. But it wasn't enough. Whatever. And so we'll find out. Maybe this Delcy Rodriguez will just offer the same deal, but because she's not Maduro and she's not dancing in the street, they'll say, okay.
Do you think that the U.S. will force Venezuela to decouple itself from China? Because that is what the new security paper that was released was stating.
Right.
It was saying that we can't have economic ties. And then will China allow that to happen?
Yeah, it's unclear at this stage. It really is. They haven't. I think there was at least one statement. I actually, I should have looked at it more clearly. Just glanced at a headline that, that at least for now, they're not going to interfere, with the China trade, with the exports to China. But we'll see what happens long term. I think it's just too early to say.
What is the world response, though, is been that we're now operating in a new world, a new reality, that there is the nail in the coffin of the rules-based order official now after this? We've kind of talked about it, like it's been dying for a while because the U.S. makes the rules. But this is just so blatant that people are realizing there is no rules.
Right. In some ways, okay, I go with the definition that actually the political scientist Richard Sakwa uses, that he says he contrasts the rules-based international order to international law. International law and the United Nations and all that is what was set up in the wake of World War II. and that's what governed the world very imperfectly, but it did, essentially those were the main institutions that mediated between states but it was more recently, I guess, maybe beginning really with the attack on Serbia, in the late 1990s, that the U.S. began to move beyond that and then began to speak of this rules-based international order, which is essentially, it's our rules. It's, American-led Western hegemony sets the rules, and then everybody, else is expected to follow. But there was this, at least a pretense, right, of some sort of system of rules. And obviously it was, employed, there was a huge double standard. It was employed very inconsistently. That was the nature of it, really. It's just like we get to decide when we apply these rules. And so so then you saw things like the invasion of Iraq, actually the attack on Serbia itself, and the attack on Libya and so on and so forth. These were all done. Well, Libya, they actually went to the United Nations, so I'll set that one aside. But these were all done, with at least kind of a fig leaf of some sort of legality. It was phony. When you look under it, it was crude geopolitics. It wasn't so different from what Trump just did, but there was this attempt to maintain this fiction of legality, of some sort of system of rules. And that's what we've seen really since the 1990s on. And that's the so-called rules-based international order. It's really, again, we decide, and it's arbitrary. But at least there is this pretense. There's a great effort that went into creating, this sense of this aura of legality. It's about human rights or whatever. And, of course, we're not doing this for our own interest. It's just that we're trying to defend the interests of these poor people in this country and so on and so forth. And you hear a little bit of that from Trump. But the thing about Trump is that he just drops all that. And he just says outright, yeah, we're going to take the oil. Yeah, he talks like a mafioso, and it's just like they got to do. If she doesn't do what's right, it's going to be even worse for her than for Maduro. Again, this is the way a mafioso talks. It's not the way that the Biden administration and previous administrations talked, even when they did things that were actually pretty similar. So this is what it is. The whole pretense has been set aside, and it's just naked, raw exercise of power, unapologetic, for everybody to see. And I think that is significant. It is very significant. And it means that we are in a whole new territory. It is, I think, ringing alarm bells across the world. And I, again, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I think it's also probably ringing alarm bells within, parts of the deep state too.
Right.
They prefer the old one, the hypocritical one where we had the fig leaf of legalism and concern for human rights. That's what worked. That was part of the formula that seemed to work quite well for them. But he's thrown it aside, and now, and he's being open about what you're doing, and you're not supposed to do that.
Right. And, the scary thing is like I said, is just the response, this raw use of power that just flies in the wind of any type semblance of international law. And it's celebrated so much in the United States. So many Americans are just like, yeah, the hoorah, yeah, we did it. Yeah. It's like without any understanding what the implications of this, that we have created a much more dangerous world for everybody, including us.
Right.
And I don't know where it's going to go, but.
Right. And then there's also there is the absence, as you pointed out later. I mean, you have the people celebrating it, but there are the lack of protests. And it seems like at least a couple decades ago, we probably would have had protests, significant protests. We may see a few, and maybe they'll start to rise. But right now, we don't have a real anti-war opposition of any, significance in this country. It just doesn't seem to be here. That's part of the problem.
It's just so wild to have a president like this in our time and age, 21st century, behaving this way, you know, with this imperialistic fashion, just exercises of raw power, and he's on Twitter. And there's so much just slop that is being fed to us. All these stupid memes and AI videos and all, just like how great this is. People eat it up. It's just it's insane, and everybody's just making it political. If you say anything like, "Oh, like this is bad," bye rules based order, like, "Oh, you some type of Marxist, you love it," they make it. It's just so silly. It's so reductionist. The thinking.
Right. It is too. You know, one thing is like Venezuela. The Venezuelan government is not a Marxist government. We're not in that age anymore. Things have really changed. You know, again, my understanding is that it's actually a very socially conservative government. And like the views of his party and most of the people in Venezuela are more similar to the views of, you know, on social issues of Trump supporters. And they're just not even aware of that. You know, things have changed. Another thing I just when I mentioned that is that I was struck by the fact, like within Latin America, the right wing is very pro-American. So within Venezuela, the right wing is actually probably is very happy about this. I think they're keeping quiet. I think that this talk about actually massive demonstrations or celebrations is almost entirely fabricated. But there is a right wing that's very pro-American, and it's true throughout Latin America. But then like when you go to Europe, it's generally the populist right that is more suspicious of America. You get something very, very different. And it's a left-wing establishment is just very solidly, you know, pro-Western hegemony.
Yeah, well, I think the Chilean president, I think he's been very critical of Maduro. I don't know if he's right-wing, but he's went out and just said that, you know, the U.S. has changed the rules essentially. And, you know, today it was Venezuela, tomorrow it could be you. You know, and that's what it is.
Yeah,
and then I
believe that he's actually right wing. So that's interesting. Yeah, there is a limit. You know, it may actually support let's say the pro sovereignty people. You know, within Latin America, the reaction to this. You know, I've heard that like even like opposition. People who were opposed to Maduro in places like Miami, some of them went out. And so there was at least some demonstrations. I don't think it was very large, but there was an anti-American or demonstration in Miami by people who were anti-Maduro. You know, again, it's just like, yeah, you know, we don't like him, but you can't do this.
Right. Yeah. I don't understand. I hate that everybody tries to go partisan with everything like this. Yeah. Like I don't just that. We are descending into the law of the jungle with this type of action. That is the outcome of this. And so, we're not exaggerating the significance of it, right?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Chaos really will likely reign after this, not just in multiple areas. You know, you can make the argument like China, you know, we just went in and just took their president. Could China do that in Taiwan? You know, it's like, well, the U.S. did that, and they have the capability. They can they're able to fly over Taiwan, and I don't know if you saw that report. You know, J-20 flew over the south of Taiwan, and Taiwan couldn't even see it.
Right. I did read that. Actually, in the case of Taiwan, of course, Taiwan does have the law, international law, on its side when it comes to Taiwan. China does have that because everyone recognizes, virtually every government in the world recognizes Taiwan as Chinese territory that needs to eventually be reunified with China. And so I mean, they would have much more of a right, you know, to do that. They would actually have a legal justification for a military, let's say a blockade of Taiwan.
Yeah. You know, Israel and America, we're just two peas in the pod when it comes to just destroying any idea of an international order. I mean, we've seen Israel just do decapitation strike out of decapitation strike, bombing countries constantly. The United States is doing the same thing now. You know, it's so blatant. Any idea that it's just, I don't think people can. It's hard to go back and think about how the world was 4 years ago. You know, before the Ukraine or before October 7th, but it's really different.
It really is. And then you go back another, you know, let's say 25-year generation before that, and it's again, we were in a very, very different place. Even back then. I mean, the things had started really decaying, I think, with the fall of the Soviet Union as we became a hyperpower. That's when it wasn't immediately apparent, but that's when, the old international order began to fall apart, and we began to develop these dreams of, a new so-called rules-based international order, which is where, that we dominated. But that is now, we've even moved beyond that, as we're just saying, especially with this attack on Venezuela.
Do you think that the only hope to preserve some type of stability in the world now is that countries have to create new institutions? We already have BRICS, but Venezuela was a part of BRICS. So it shows that...
Yeah, but they weren't actually a member. No, they wanted to be, and that actually their application was vetoed by Brazil. I think Brazil has to bear some responsibility for all of this.
Okay, I remember there was one country that vetoed. Was it Brazil?
Oh, yeah, my understanding it was
Venezuela.
Brazil.
I thought it was
now,
a different,
Brazil was coming
Chile
out
or
like
something that.
One thing is I noticed the silence of Brazil throughout this until the very end. Actually, Lula came out with a fairly strong statement, but it was too little, too late. Just maybe a week before the abduction. And then they came out with this, again, a fairly strong denunciation of what the U.S. did. But I think it was very foolish. If there was any way, Brazil, of course, is the giant of Latin America. And if from the start they had said, look, this cannot happen. We need to stand united. If all of Latin, they had really led the Latin American countries, I think they could have possibly prevented this. At least it would have made the U.S. reconsider the whole thing. If they found a strong, united Latin America opposed to this, saying, hey, you just can't do this. We're not going to accept this. We're not going back to the 19th century. But he didn't do it, and I think that's actually to his shame. The one president who was consistently very outspoken about this was the president of Colombia. And now he's being threatened with attack.
Yeah, right. Trump is saying that we might have to take him out next.
Yeah.
Do you think that BRICS membership could have protected Venezuela?
It could have helped. One thing it would have. The thing is, it's not a military alliance. But it would have strengthened, its economic ties which are very vital to everything else. The thing is, I don't know. I think it may have been too late. Like, as they became a member last year, it would have been too late to make a difference. But in the longer run, it strengthens your country. You develop, integrate more strongly with these other powers, and by building up your own economy, you're also able to build up stronger defense. I think that's more of a long-term project because, again, it's not a military alliance.
Yeah, well, do you think that the new rules-based order will probably have to grow out of BRICS in some way? But you said, BRICS isn't a military alliance, but potentially because of this action, they might start creating some type of security guarantees for its members that are like, okay, everybody's in here and nobody's allowed to attack everybody. We do free trade, but then, not an Article 5 type of thing, but I'm sure there could be some assistance.
Those are different. I don't think we're going to see that. And that's really something separate from BRICS. But we do see something like a kind of a new Westphalia. That was the agreement after the religious wars in Europe that, okay, we respect the sovereignty of other countries. So the problem was that, okay, we don't like the fact that you're Catholic, or we don't like the fact that you're Protestant, so we're going to attack you. And then in the end it said, okay, none of this. Okay, maybe we don't like the fact that you're Protestant or that you're Catholic, but we're not going to attack you. We respect, each country's sovereignty. And that was something that was built up. And then it was kind of, you could say, reinstated through the United Nations and international the order that followed World War II. But it was really beginning with, I think, in the 1990s that the U.S. began to take that apart, and now it's just been ripped apart. But what BRICS seems to represent is like a kind of a new Westphalia. And say, look, you're Hindu, you're Confucian, you're Orthodox Christian, you're Shia Muslim, but that's not an excuse for any one of us to attack the other. We're going to trade and we're going to respect each other's sovereignty. And we're going to cooperate where we can, and where we have differences, we're going to just set them aside and say that's your own affair.
Right. Maybe we should call it Eastphalia then.
Yeah, maybe, right.
So do you think that essentially what we're looking at now is that there will be two worlds? There will be the BRICS world, the international rules-based, and then there's the American empire, and you are either the American or a vassal to America. And those are your choices. And any country that is not part of these two worlds is in danger, is in the jungle, and is in danger of being gobbled up.
Yeah, that seems to be the trend. We're not there yet. It's like, again, the BRICS nations try to make it really clear we're not an anti-Western bloc. We're not a bloc, period. But the continued hostility, from the U.S. above all, is kind of forcing them to do that. They're creating these blocs, by being just unremittingly hostile to the alternatives that are being built up to their system. They're trying to maintain hegemony. So we are coming to some, over time, I think we may find ourselves in something like, the situation we were before the 1990s, where we had, the communists versus, the so-called free world.
Maybe all these old boomers, they almost prefer that because that's the world that they grew up in. So they kind of almost want to return to that. And like you said, the Roe Doctrine, or I don't know if we should dignify it with that name that he labeled himself, the Monroe Doctrine 2.0. Yeah. Like you said, that is forcing bloc politics. That's what it is. It's just saying that you said Western countries could be part of BRICS. Well, no, the U.S. says no, you can't, or else we might invade you. Well, we'll see what they do with Brazil. Brazil is part of BRICS. Can you stop Brazil from being part of, trading with Russia and China?
Right. Yeah. Well, Trump has said that he wants to basically destroy BRICS. And I don't think he can, but if he tries to, I think you'll find the BRICS countries drawing closer together, and actually that may result in an acceleration of the integration that's occurring over there.
Can you rank these events in what do you think of the most important pivotal moments? The beginning of the SMO in February 2022, October 7th, and now this. Are they, in your mind? To me, these are all huge, significant events that the world will not be the same after.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It's unclear at this point exactly, where this is going. Again, we had this stunning raid, but just the fact that it happened and it was carried out in the way that it did, and there was no attempt to hide, to cloak what the U.S. had done. Just that, even if let's say the events that follow in Venezuela are not so dramatic, at least not in the short run or the medium term. I think it is on par with the others. It is something that it's an eye-opening event. It is one of those things you wake up and say, we're in a new world now. Again, like you say, it's like, okay, none of this talk about the rules-based international order. I guess you could argue, well, maybe like with the new administration, they'll repair all this. Somehow I doubt it. One thing is that we saw, like with Biden, there was talk, I think he even promised like he was going to resuscitate the JCPOA, the treaty that the Obama administration had reached with Iran, that was torn up by Trump. But when he got there, they looked at it and said, this is to our advantage. I remember there was a lot of talk, especially among conservatives. They're really pro-Chinese. Those Democrats are going to, as soon as they take power, they're going to be, they'll be cozying up to China. There really wasn't any difference. He continued all the tariffs, everything, all the sanctions that were placed on China, because they looked at him. Because I think in the end, it's just like, this makes geopolitical sense. So, from the point of view of the deep state, we don't like the fact that he was so open about it, but okay. We like these things. We want to keep them the way they are. And I think that that's what we're going to see. You may see a difference in tone, but I don't think you can really let the cat's out of the bag. It's just everybody sees what's going on. There will be some effort to maybe speak differently, Maybe we'll see something similar take place in Israel, but it's already too late. Like we've seen what they've done, and it's just I think just like Israel can't go back from October 7th, I should say the 2 years that followed it, they can't really return. Israel's been changed forever. I think that the U.S. has to. It's not just this one incident, but this is the one that kind of, encapsulates the whole trend, especially of this first year of the Trump administration. And we got 3 more years, who knows? Maybe if the Democrats came right in right now, they might be able to paper things over and say, we've fixed this, everything, we're back to where we were. But I think at the end of 3 years, we're going to get to a point where we can't return, after 3 more years.
I mean, I feel like we already are.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah.
I feel like the likelihood of us actually taking Greenland and then going to war with Iran or bombing Iran, I just feel like I believe that will happen now. I didn't think that they would happen. At least Greenland was kind of just out of my mind. But after this, I just feel like they're serious about it. And it seems like the Europeans are all of a sudden just realizing like, oh, he might actually do this.
Right.
But at the same time, they don't condemn the action.
No, they didn't. There were very mealy-mouthed statements from all the European leaders. I mean, really, maybe there's one statement that I missed, but interesting, like the foreign minister of France actually denounced it shortly after it happened and say, oh, the French. But then Macron made his statement, and he did not denounce it. Again, they're saying, Maduro was absolutely terrible. Well, we're glad, and we hope that he's gone, and this will be good for the Venezuelan people. And of course, we support international law. He said, no, you don't. If you supported international law, you would have denounced this. But those are the kind of statements that you're getting from the European leaders, including Kaja Kallas and Ursula von der Leyen.
Yeah, I think the Serbian president Vučić has spoken pretty strongly against it.
Right. He's not part of the EU, though. Yeah, right. But you're right. Yeah.
He's saying that basically, we are in a new world, and that now everybody's got to fend for themselves because it's might versus right now is what the U.S. has done.
Yeah, might makes right. So he said Serbia needs to Serbia needs to build up its defenses because that's the only thing that's going to protect us. Yeah, no, that was quite. Quite a remarkable statement, but I think a very realistic one.
So in the short term, what do you see happening? Do you see that Delcy Rodriguez refuses to cooperate with the United States? Then what? The ball's in Trump's court. Was he going to try to kill her, kidnap her, send boots on the ground? Or that Delcy Rodriguez does comply? Because I think the last thing she said is that they're hoping for a diplomatic solution. They're reaching out and want to work and talk. Do you think that both options are equal?
That's right. I really don't know. I think it's very hard to say. Again, there's this whole question. We don't know. There was that report in the Miami Herald that she actually negotiated this with the Americans through Qatar, but we don't know that that's true. It may not be true at all. But even if it's not true, she might end up just, offering the same deal, like I said, that Maduro offered, but this time they'll take it because she's not Maduro, and they'll call it a victory. But whatever. Yeah, I there's also this question of like why, apparently no man pads were used. Many people wonder because they were supposed to have hundreds of man pads, and you would think that there were air defense units, throughout Caracas and certainly around the palace that would have been able to take down these helicopters. It didn't happen. So was there some kind of somebody was bought off? There was a stand down order. I think probably there was. It's hard to explain it otherwise. There's also a chance of just utter incompetence, like they took the night off or something, but it seems unlikely to me. But if in fact, there was somebody that was bought off and a stand down order was issued, I imagine whoever did it, because the rest of the Venezuelan military is intact, and they do seem to be very angry about what happened, that person would be in real trouble. So if we find out that, he's already outside of the country and whatever, then I think we know what happened. But let's wait and see. There's a lot of questions is like, where did Delcy Rodriguez make a deal? If she did, is that something that the rest of the country, and obviously most importantly, the military, is that something that they're going to accept? Will we see some sort of civil war? It could be, because, this is something, these are existential questions for Venezuela. And it's just not clear right now, what's going on within that government, how much the U.S. is going to demand. Maybe the U.S. will demand very little and like I was saying, and that for at least the immediate future that we won't see any chaos. But I think there's, in the long run, I think that we will. It's just that, like, if the American companies come in again and start to take over the oil business there, which is what Trump says they're going to do, right? There's going to be real anger, and if the government's going along with it, I imagine parts of the government, namely the military, will not, and we may see an insurrection. We may see, again, a prolonged civil war. It may not happen right away, but there is certainly the potential for it.
Right. I
think more than the potential.
I think it's impossible for this to end well for Trump in the United States. I mean, you kidnapped the president and his wife. Think about the national humiliation and the anger that these people feel. I mean, it's worse than a decapitation. You went in and kidnapped them.
Yeah.
And so what's going to end? They're just sitting there going to be in a prison, in the United States this whole time on. Yeah. I don't know when they'll go to court. I mean, the whole thing is just so crazy. I can't imagine that, you kidnap somebody's president and his wife, and then they come in and say, we're going to start taking your resources, developing you, whatever. And everyone's like, okay, I guess we'll forget about the fact that you kidnapped the president and his wife.
Right. Yeah, no, it's hard to imagine that, parts of Venezuela will say that's okay and will actually celebrate it. But I think there's a very significant and well-armed part that are going to say, if it will say no. And then we have, we have a very violent, chaotic situation on our hands potentially, or, almost certainly. Another question is what's going to happen in this court? Will this be a fair trial? Do they really have the evidence? It's not clear that they do, that they have any evidence. You can always, I think with almost any president anywhere, you can dig up something that's shady or whatever. But it's not clear that they really have a case to make. And is there a chance that this will be a fairly conducted trial and that he could actually be acquitted? Maybe not. Maybe this is not possible, but I think it's something to consider. It's different from Noriega. Noriega clearly was deeply involved in the drug trade. Now, one thing that wasn't mentioned in the mainstream press was that Noriega was a CIA asset for the longest time, and the CIA was complicit in his drug activities. This is something. And then that was actually under George H.W. Bush when he was the CIA director. And then it was him as president that went after him. But that's a whole other story. But it just shows the tremendous hypocrisy of the U.S. in these cases.
I mean, we can talk about the hypocrisy forever, but just the one so blatant thing we talk about international law is, Netanyahu, there's an ICC arrest warrant out for him, and he's coming over to the White House every other day, it seems like. There's not an arrest warrant for this, but we go through this very elaborate capture and scheme, and then we say it's about narco-terrorism, then they stole our oil, they stole their own oil. I don't know how it worked exactly. And then I think in the indictment itself, it says one of the things listed there is that he had possession of a machine gun, an assault rifle. It's like, it's his country. Right, First of all, half the people in America have machine guns.
Well, maybe not quite machine gun.
Well, more or less, it's his country, and he's the president, and he makes the laws.
Actually, I think there was like a factual error in the first sentence of the indictment, or maybe it's more of a just a poorly written sentence. It just shows that like whoever wrote this was not really top drawer. Let's just put it that they may not really have a case against him. It remains to be seen.
Right. You're saying that the commander-in-chief of the Venezuelan military, he had a machine gun in Venezuela. And that's why we had to go in and take him and kidnap him. Yeah, the whole thing is so nutty. Yeah, I don't know, Dad. This is, I think we'll be talking about this for a while because I think you're right. This is going to blow up, and it always does. It never ends well. Like we know, and this is what's so disappointing again for me with the American people. We talked about, you said how people were pumped with Iraq or, Midnight Hammer, or it's like we've gone through this over and over again. Why do you keep on falling for the same slop of like, hurrah, hurrah, American eagle screech, American flag, jets flying over, everybody just forgets their whole life and just said somehow this is great. I just don't get it. I'm really disappointed in my fellow Americans that are just out there just like they don't have any understanding. They just can't think about it. It's just
right. And they never stop to think. They say, well, have I ever been to Venezuela? Do I know anything about this country? It's just like, can we just go in and grab people, that we declare that we don't like, and just stop and put yourself in the shoes of those people. And that's something that clearly we don't do, is a complete failure to empathize and to actually also to admit ignorance. It's just like, this gives me a thrill, because it's just like that Hollywood movie that I really liked.
It's this American exceptionalism. It's a disease. It's a disease, and it's going to get us all killed, you know? Okay, maybe we'll end it there on that happy note. All right, Dad. Okay, thanks a bunch. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.